Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Filtered webinar. I'm joined with Dr. Chris Littlewood of Filtered. How are you today, Chris?
Good, thanks, Jonathan. Very good.
Excellent. Today our webinar will be focused on personalized training, if not now, when. And I believe Chris Littlewood will be recapping a recent learning event he was lucky enough to go to in the past few weeks. But just quickly, a word from me about what we do. So we are filtered.com. We provide a number of workplace skills. Maybe you've encountered a few e-learning companies in your time. We kind of do it a bit differently here at Filtered. We specialize in personalized training, which I'm not going to go too much into, but basically we pick out how best you can take a course. Chris will be going into that more later, but just from me, if during this webinar, if you have any problems with your connection or with our sound, or if you lose connection at all, just drop a question or drop a line to me or Chris on the webinar organizer name in the control panel, and we'll try and answer your question as quickly and relevantly as possibly. So without any further ado, I'm just going to pass on to Chris. But just one last word about this webinar. If you are unlucky enough to lose connection, you will be able to go onto our website tomorrow and access a recording of the webinar. That website for you will be filtered.com/webinar. So, Chris Littlewood, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. Enjoy the webinar, everybody.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. So as Jonathan said, I'm Chris Littlewood. I work here at Filtered. So my particular responsibility is that I'm head of what we call the science team here. So we do data science and analysis in support of an algorithm, which I'll explain a little bit more about later. So for those of you who don't know as well and what we do, so we do training in online essential business courses, so things like Microsoft Excel, communications, leadership, and also customers' own content. And the thing that sets us apart in the way that we do that is that we personalize that content. So what we mean by that is we strip out information within the course, strip out training material that isn't relevant to the user, either because they know it already or because it's something that's not relevant for the way that they want to apply the training. So, we're really about personalization in this particular way of subject matter. And because of that, and because of what's going on in the rest of L&D, we really feel like we are a part of a movement at the moment. There are lots of firms now starting to think about how to personalize online training in one way or another, whether that's like us, through adjusting the content, so it consists of stuff that's particularly relevant to the user, or whether it's for the particular pace of learning, like companies like Duolingo doing language training do, or whatever. There are lots of different companies sort of pioneering different approaches in personalizing online training. So because we feel part of a movement, because we feel like everyone is learning fast in this respect, then we wanted to foster discussion and innovation around personalization in online training. And so with this in mind, this year, in fact last month, we organised with the Learning and Performance Institute an afternoon of discussion and debate consisting of some talks and some discussions and questions and answers around the theme of personalization. And that's what I wanted to talk to you today about in this webinar, to try and give you a flavour for that event. So that event ran, I think it was something like the 20th of October here in London, and we hired a venue and arranged for speakers to talk on subjects that were either relevant to personalisation in particular, or were sort of examples of why personalisation might be valuable in their particular field. So hopefully what I can do here is give you a flavour of that event and try and whet your appetite for it a little bit, either to find out a little bit more by getting in touch with us, which will be very welcome, or we'll be publishing and sending you a link to a recording of one of the talks at that event after the webinar. I hope you'll watch that. And I hope maybe you'll consider participating in and perhaps shaping future versions of events like this, because we're keen to do the same sort of thing again next year. So, in order to give you this flavour of this event, what I'll do is I will run through the speakers, who was there, who gave a talk, give you an overview of what they were talking about. Nothing very comprehensive, but just to give you a sense of what the subject was, but also to draw out from those talks some of the points that struck me particularly as resonant. And then I'll finish this webinar with some slides from my own talk on that day. My own talk was concerned with data and how powerful data is in this field, what the potential is for use of data, learning data in particular, in our field, but also what the main challenge is, in my opinion, in doing that well. So first of all, I'm going to run through the sort of cast of characters from the day. So first of all, this is Mark Zhao-Sanders. So he is our managing director, and so Mark's founded Filtered, but he also founded a number of other businesses, including in L&D, but also to do with access to work. And so Mark kicked off the day, and I'll explain what he was talking about in a minute. Next is Donald Clark. So Donald Clark is, I guess, famous in L&D circles. So he founded, grew, and sold Epic Group, and one of the pioneers of online training. And he's an investor in several innovative businesses. And of course, he blogs and speaks prolifically. So I'll explain a bit about his talk in a moment. There's Richard Anning. So he is he's been a friend of Filtered for a while. He is the head of the IT faculty at the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, and so they have partnered with us for a number of years now in offering their members training, and he's talking a little bit from a client perspective about personalization and why it might be valuable. Then there's my talk. I gave a talk on, as I said, data and its promise for data science. Steve Wheeler, so he is, for those who don't know, an academic. He's associate professor at Plymouth University, and like Donald, blogger and researcher, and sometimes controversialist. And then, besides the talks, there was a panel which consisted of the people who'd given talks, but also we were joined by Nigel Payne and Ed Monk. So that's the cast of characters. I don't know, perhaps some of them are familiar to people, hopefully so. I just want to run through the sort of broad overview of what they were talking about, what they had to say at the event. So Mark kicked off by introducing us, introducing the event, try and set out a bit of a story around our journey at Filtered and how we've come to personalization. So Mark made a point that as a company, we didn't, when we were founded, we didn't start by thinking we wanted to offer personalized training. So we originally started offering training mostly to consumers in Microsoft Excel. And in the first instance, that had a personalized element, but that came almost accidentally. Our intention at the start was to offer simply effective training. And we sort of stumbled into this arena of personalization because of its power, really. So because we found it to be a very effective way of delivering effective training. So Mark sort of painted a bit of a picture of our journey and how we'd arrived at this point, and how it was an exciting time to be involved in L&D because of the amount of activity and innovation that was going on around personalization in particular, but in lots of other aspects too. So Donald Clark gave a talk on the future of e-learning and artificial intelligence. So I think, so Donald's main points were that, so his talk really felt like a bit of a wake-up call for learning and development. So he painted a picture of an industry that has perhaps been a bit slow to change, but that now was having change forced upon it through the progress in technology and through the pull of consumers who are sort of demanding that change. And so Donald talked about the transformative power of algorithms in other industries. So the examples of Netflix, for instance, and how, again, another sort of content-driven industry where algorithms are changing the way that people make choices, changing the way people consume content. But he also talked about innovation and transformation through algorithms in the learning and development pipeline. So he gave some examples of some companies that he's involved with. So one is Cogbooks, who do adaptive learning, so learning which personalizes again to each individual user. In that case, particularly sort of constructing a non-linear learning journey through the content. So rather than treating learning as a linear experience, it's personalizing the learner's experience based on what they've just done, how they've fared with that bit of content, and so what might best suit them next. He also talked about a product called Wiki, which I'll come on to a little bit more in a bit. So Richard Anning, so as I said before, he is the head of the IT faculty at the ICAW. So the ICAW, Institute of Chartered Accountants England and Wales, is this membership organisation for accountants. And Richard talked about his role there in sort of fostering engagement, fostering skill development in that body, and I'll explain a little bit more about that further on in the talk. There's my talk, and I'm going to deliver part of that at the end, so I won't say any more now. So Steve Wheeler, he talked about how personalised learning is actually already upon us. So there's a lot of talk about what might happen in the future on this day, but Steve Wheeler, I think, brought home how this was already happening. And the panel discussion was varied and strongly felt in a lot of cases. We haven't done it yet, but we'll try and get some version of that recording online so that people can share in that too. So this was Mark, as I mentioned, setting up the day and talking about personalised training and our particular journey. And this was this is Donald, as I said, painting the picture of an industry which was sort of being forced to change fast, and so both by technology and by the pull of its customers, the pull of its consumers. I mentioned a moment ago Wiki, so this is WIQI. So this was something that was new to me. So this is a project that Donald's involved with, and as I said, it offers this sort of tantalizing prospect of training being constructed algorithmically. So the idea being that you could take a body of content, something as sort of straightforward as a textbook, or as a PowerPoint slides, or as Wikipedia content, and using an algorithm, turn that into something that's useful from a training point of view. So that sounds exciting as a way of. So first of all, that sounds like quite a cheap way to make training content, and that's a point that Donald made. It might offer some opportunities there, but I think also it just offers the prospect of turning much more material into something that's useful from a training point of view. So that sounded like an exciting early development. I think it's fair to say Donald wholeheartedly embraces the technological change that is in the offing, and his talk was forcefully and entertainingly put. And the good news is that you can watch it. So we'll post a link to this at the end of the webinar, and you can see what Donald had to say in person. For now, I just want to draw out a couple of the points that resonated with me in particular. So the first one was about this, just how remarkable this period is in which we are living. So this is Donald's statement here, that there's been more pedagogic change in the last 20 years than in the last 2000, and that's been facilitated and driven by technology. So I think this is just a transformation from a traditional sort of teacher student relationship, a lecture or a talk, whatever, through to something that can be much more interactive, and that's sort of facilitated through the technology. And I think that is a key enabler of personalization too. That the technology is what is making it possible to personalize training in a practical way. The other point I wanted to draw out from Donald's talk was exemplified in this slide. So this, Donald talked a little bit about artificial intelligence and the sort of visions of how that might transform our world, and particularly learning and development. And a lot of those guesses as to how artificial intelligence might transform us is a bit naive. It's sort of thinking essentially that artificial intelligence or an intelligent algorithm is going to substitute and imitate traditional training and the way that traditional training is delivered. And what this slide is saying, well, that's not what happened with flight. So if you look at the dawn of aviation, then there are those jerky films of people on the cliffs of Dover attempting to fly by flapping, but that proved to be a dead end. It's not through imitating nature, it's not through imitating the sort of pre-existing way of flying, imitating birds that we've been able to fly. It's through doing things in a different way, and I think that is something that is I feel really strongly about learning and development, that this revolution that's happening, the idea that we can personalize, use algorithms, use data, do things online and do things automatically, won't work well if we just attempt to substitute traditional methods of training. What we should be trying to do is play to its strengths, to spot what online is good at, spot what personalization is good at, spot what algorithms are good at, and build them in a way that plays to those strengths. And I think this slide captures it very nicely for me. Just to say a little bit more about Richard Anning's talk. So Richard and the ICAW have been innovative in supporting their members' professional development. So they've set up what they call an Excel community for accountants with an interest in Excel. And Richard talked about how that had fostered engagement and the appeal of personalization. We're proud to have played a part in that, in delivering some of that training. The thing that struck me was the importance of risk from Excel for accountants' point of view. So thinking about this group and their individual needs. So we offer our Excel training to a wide variety of customers. But it struck me that accountants had a particularly individual viewpoint. And the thing that came through strongly from Richard's talk was the emphasis on risk. So seeing Excel, yes, they're seeing Excel as a powerful tool and something that sort of facilitates their work, but also seeing it as something that needs, through training, to be managed and managed in a way that means it can be used without introducing risks in the business from errors in spreadsheets and the like. So to me, that sort of, it felt like this was a strong argument for personalization, in that you have a group of users here who have a particular angle that's different from the average user, but which can probably be well served if you can tailor the training well for them. So this little montage is of the panel, but Steve Wheeler is second from the left there. So Steve talked about, we challenged the idea that there might be single ways of, well, broadly seeing the world, but also measuring intelligence or achievement in learning effectively. So he said that, he thought that really the argument for personalization was straightforward, that in lots of respects, in terms of proficiency and in terms of pace of training and personalization of training, there were obviously differentiated needs there. And he pointed out that whether we intend it or not, then learning is already highly personalized by learners themselves through their own decisions, and the fact that learners are consuming training from a variety of sources. So there's a slide of his here that I just wanted to make that point with. So what he's saying is that each individual is building their own learning environment. They are accessing training not just from sort of conventional sources of formal training interventions, but from a host of informal channels, informal formats, informal tools, from networks, from people. And so really, from a learner's point of view, we're not doing anything very innovative in providing them with personalized training. They're already personalizing it. All we're doing is trying better to fit into that model of consumption. So that was the takeaway point from Steve's talk that I wanted to mention. So lastly, I want to talk about what I had to say. So this is me at the event. My talk was in two parts. In the first half of the talk, I talked about filter personalization and how we go about doing it. So if you're interested in that and don't know how we do that already, then there are other webinars on our site which cover the ground, or else please get in touch. We'll be happy to talk you through it. I'm not going to cover that ground today because, as I say, it's been covered elsewhere. But what I would like to do is to go through the second half of my talk. So as it says on the slide, the data challenge. So my point here is simply that it is data, so data through the fact that the training is online, the fact that it is available over the internet. It's data that's facilitating this personalization possibilities in our industry, and that offers great promise. And I wanted to explain how I thought about that promise and what I felt the potential was. But it also offers a challenge. I think it raises a challenge in fulfilling on that promise effectively. So I want to talk about that too. So to start with, though, the plus side, the promise. So this is what, in a phrase, I think the promise of data is, or data science. And it's this: it's understanding the what without the how or the why. So what do I mean by that? So traditionally, when we want to make progress with understanding, then we've often fallen back on the scientific model. So scientific model, then you develop a theory, a guess, or a model as to how the world works, and then you test that theory either by doing an experiment or just by your observation against the world. So if the theory and the world tally, then you're okay. Your theory might be okay. If there's a disagreement, then you know it's not a good theory, or at least it's incomplete, and you need to revise it. So you make a new guess, and then you go back and test that one against observation or experiment. So what that really means is, in doing science in the traditional way, or following the scientific method at least, then you need this sort of higher level of understanding, the theory about why things happen. So theories, I would say, are to do with how or why things happen. So to take an example, the theory is gravitation. The sort of and that's the sort of how or why planets follow their paths in orbit, or how or why apples fall to the ground from trees. But the what is the more straightforward thing, that actually in autumn apples do fall to the ground from trees. So to do science, you need that sort of high level understanding of what's driving the observation. But in data science, it is promising that you can circumvent that you can jump straight to the what simply from the data. And I'll give an example now as to how that can happen. So what this is a set of data. This is Google Trends over time. So this is the popularity of a search term over time. So from around 2005 through to quite recently, there's a popularity of how many people are searching for lunar eclipse. And you can see some really defined peaks in the data. And your hope is that those might mean something. And sure enough, when you actually overlay that data set with the dates of lunar eclipses, then you can see that they're coincident. So all of those big peaks are explained by the fact that there was a lunar eclipse happening at the time. And so you might say, well, there are some little peaks there. What about those? Those aren't explained by those eclipses. Well, actually, there are eclipses then too. They're just partial or penumbral. So you can even see that this data set helps you differentiate between whether a full eclipse happened or a partial one. So you might say, so what? What does there are easier ways of finding out when there was a lunar eclipse than recourse to Google Trends, and that's true. You know, you could go and look it up on an astronomical website, or if you're a real loss, work it out from first principles and a model of the solar system. But the point here is that this technique can be applied to things that aren't nearly as well defined as a lunar eclipse. And there, that you might not have that alternative method of understanding what happened. So to take an example again, this is the same sort of thing. It's Google search terms, how many people are searching, in this case, for the term flu epidemic. So flu epidemics are a lot less clearly defined than eclipses. It's harder to find a clear list of what happened in the past in terms of flu epidemics, because the sort of definition is at least open to interpretation. And yet you can see, if you look through this data set, you can spot when those occurrences were. You can spot flu epidemics in the past just from Google Trends without understanding anything about epidemiology. And then to take another step towards being useful and to where we want to go with this, you can actually do something predictive. So if you start to search, instead of flu epidemics, for flu symptoms, then you can start to spot really early the onset of an epidemic. So this is actually used by Google, for instance. So what Google do is they monitor searches for flu symptoms, and then they pass that information on. If they see some unusual activity in that respect, if they see an upturn in the volume of people searching for that in a particular locality, they can notify the authorities, and they do in the United States at least. And the advantage of that is that well before the statistics on flu instances are sort of captured by the local government and national government, they get this early warning even before actually people report to their doctor. They can see instances of flu kicking off, and so you can use this as a predictive tool. Again, without understanding, you don't need to understand how flu works, you don't need to understand how diseases spread. All you need is a lot of data, and you can do sort of jumping straight to the what will happen. It's in this respect. So to try and summarize what I think this means for learning and development, well, it means that we can make fast progress. So while it's nice and desirable to be able to understand how people learn, the neurology of it, the sort of best practice in terms of constructing training, you don't need to do that to make some progress, because what you can do is just, as long as you've got a good measure of success, you can use an algorithm, you can use the data to spot what's working well and do more of that. So you don't need any longer to construct your theory, your theoretical model of how people learn. You can still make progress with just the data and with an algorithm. So, and that might be desirable in lots of circumstances, but it's particularly desirable in circumstances which are fast-paced, because where things are fast-paced, where things are changing really frequently, it might not be possible to construct a theory before you need to, in the time you've got available. You might not have the luxury of being able to analyze the data, go away, construct a theory and test it. You might have to make a decision as to what's better or what's worth more urgently than that. So that's the promise of data science as I see it. I just want to conclude by talking briefly about what the challenge is. So what this slide is saying is that it's all very well, however clever we get with algorithms, however clever we get with algorithmic performance, it's data that really drives improvement, makes us able to do this job better. So what this graph is showing is that this is showing, comparing how well a set of algorithms, 4 algorithms, perform at a task. In fact, the task is a classification of language problem. It's spotting where what the correct use of some words or phrases is. And you can see that the algorithms all perform a little bit differently. Each line is a different algorithm. But the striking thing is that whichever algorithm you choose, if you gather lots of data, it'll do better than any of the other algorithms. So if you can get over to the right-hand side of this graph, if you can get millions of words in your database, then even if you've got a sort of mediocre, the worst algorithm, it'll do a lot better than even the best algorithm working with low data. And so this is the sort of the challenge, I think, for learning and development. It's that we really need to make sure that we capture and keep the data, and that we design our training in a way that generates sensible data in the first place. And then finally, in the absence of data, then you do need to fall back on some sensible theory, and as I was saying before, the stuff that you might want to try and skip over, but you can't if you don't have the data to do it. Okay. Thank you very much. I hope that's given you I know that was fast and covered some of the talks quite quickly. But like I say, we're making Donald Clark available, a recording of it online, so you can see the link there in the slide, but I think we're also posting it hopefully on the chat as we speak. So please follow that link. If you can't follow the link, actually, if you just search for Donald Clark and Filtered on YouTube, then it comes up top. So have a look at that talk. I think that's an interesting and controversial talk from Donald, and hopefully that'll give you a flavour for the day along with what I've said today. I think, as I said at the start, please, if you're interested in any of this, then get in touch with us. We're always interested in talking about personalisation, and really keen for you to help us to shape our thinking on it and to play a part in it. If you're interested in us, at Filtered in particular, then Jack Marshall, he's in our business development team. He'll be conducting a webinar on Wednesday the 25th of November, 4 o'clock, on how to make the most of Filtered, so how to use Filtered most effectively. So I hope some of you at least can join him there. Thanks again for your time, and I'll hand back to Jonathan.
Thanks very much, Chris. Yeah, very enjoyable session. Really enjoyed that. I've learned that if I want to avoid a flu epidemic, I should avoid Brentwood, essentially. But yeah, please do. I've linked the Donald Clark's video in the chat pane, so just jump on that link. You may need to copy and paste it into your browser if you're not able to click it as an actual link. And if you do want to keep in touch, please do visit our website at filtered.com. And to see a recording of this webinar, it'll probably go up in the next day. Just jump to filtered.com/webinars. And yeah, our next webinar will be on the 25th of November, and we'll be with Jack Marshall, our business development manager, and he'll be showing you a few tips and tricks on how to make the most of your filters. Sorry. Okay, so thanks very much, everybody, and hopefully we'll see you very soon for the next webinar. Thanks very much, Chris.